Should I give the lights now a little bit?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
You can see that a little better. So I am Vicki. I have been a docent here since 2011. I'm a mammal, so I'm teaching your mammals class today. Someone mentioned about the flood of information that you are receiving. I really, really hope that you come to these classes and you do hear some new things. Part of being an educated naturalist is having a recognition of how much you don't know. And when you come, that's the point. We're trying to give you a broad overview of all these amazing, amazing cool things that are kind of connected with Placerita. And you get to develop your enthusiasm for it, and that's what you'll be passing on to the other people that come. So you don't have to worry about knowing every single thing, but you have to worry about getting that feeling for what there is to know. And you also have an opportunity to choose to specialize in certain things that particularly excite you. When you are going through, some people are going to come out of the plants class and be like, man, that was the coolest thing ever. And if you go home and you say, I just have to look up some plants and learn more about photosynthesis, or I need to learn more about identifying those things, that's my niche, that's my thing, then that is fantastic. If you never go home feeling like you have that craving to go further, then you haven't really totally met the objective. So I'm going to be presenting a lot of things today that to some of you will be old hat, to some of you will be things that you maybe haven't thought about since you were in elementary school and learning the basics. But what I hope isn't that you'll remember everything we talk about, but that you will just get that gist and also hopefully have that chance to bring something further. The really, really great thing about living today is we are so richly, richly blessed in our access to information. So my degree is in food science. And food science is a science that has connections to a lot of different directions. That's why I chose it, because I got to take classes in physics and botany and microbiology and a lot of chemistry. But nutrition, all those things came together in that particular area. But I can teach about mammals because I have that basic background, but I have access to learning more and more about it. It's interesting to me. It's fun for me. I can go on the internet and know more than the smartest person 150 years ago knew about mammals. I can know as much as that smartest person in the world just because I'm excited about it and I can go and research on it. And I don't have to have so much money. People in past generations, in order to know what the latest information is about science, they have to be rich. We don't have to be rich. We just have to be motivated to go and do that. So I'll be able to answer some of your questions today. If you have some, there may be questions that come up that are going to go to that deeper level, and that will be for you to use that as your jumping off point to be more of a knowledgeable person. So you've come into the room and you've been looking for quite a while at this guy sitting up there on the board. Any guesses who he is? Why do we have that guy and a bowl of soup?
King Philip.
That's King Philip! Now, do you know that because of your background? It's not just, that is King Philip. That make anyone else know why we might have him up there?
Kingdom fighting.
So, King Philip came over for good soup, has helped biology students for many generations remember the classification of living things, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I know that in some of your other classes you have mentioned those things. All of that kind of classifying these living things and trying to figure out what they are and keep them organized was started by Carl Linnaeus in the mid-1700s, and he really laid a good basis. A lot of the work that he did, we still accept, even in these many, many years later. He set it up, everything very orderly, and we've been going along and adding to that. The new things that we have discovered have kind of been fitting in that for a long, long time. But something that's that old, you know, it might need some kind of changing in our modern day. And if you are taking your, well, it depends. If you're taking your biology classes today from someone who went to school a while ago, then you're still going to be learning about this pretty much. But if you're going to class with someone that's been studying more recently, instead of that kind of linear, very boxy, structured setup, you're probably going to see an organization a little bit more like that. Now, this is basically the same kind of classification, but it reflects the things that we understand more better. And instead of having that, okay, well, everything comes down and goes like that, we realize more that the relationship of living things is like a tree that branches off and goes along. And we think of things more now in their relationship, and we talk about things as having phylogenetic relationships, and we say that different things are organized into clades. So CLADE, clade, that may be a new word for you, but that is like the basis of figuring out relationships now. And here is a chart that it's kind of the same as this, but organized in a different way. The same type of information is presented here. They're trying to show you as much information as they can, all in one tidy little grouping. That's one of the things that scientists do. They try to take all this crazy information and put it into a neatly organized way so that we can access it and understand it and hopefully apply it and use it. But here you can see this overload of knowledge that is coming to us. This on the left side, you can see these are millions of years. And so this is showing you that about 500 million years ago, it appears that there was some kind of common ancestor to all of these kind of creatures. And you can see things breaking off. And instead of the old kingdom, phylum, class, order, whatever, all of this could be called together a clade. Any group of things that have a common ancestors all together are a clade. Birds alone are a clade because all birds have some sort of common ancestor. Birds and non-avian dinosaurs together are a clade. We can also include crocodiles is another clade, a different one. You notice that the dinosaurs are not in the same clade as lizards or snakes. We don't consider them reptiles, and so if you are putting dinosaurs and lizards and snakes into one group, then you also need to include crocodiles and birds in the same group. I'll show you a little more close picture of that. So just some basic information about what a clade is telling you. A clade shares an ancestor, and it shows you the branching off. We read these kind of charts from the bottom to the top. So the past going to the present. And each time you see a break off, we would call that a speciation event. So, you know, different species, generally they can't reproduce with one another, no matter how similar they may look or seem. There's been something genetically that happens so that they're different enough that they can't join their DNA and make an offspring. And so each one of those breaks shows when that's happened, there's been enough change between organisms that they no longer can be considered the same organism, and so they are branching off. Here you see, here's a common ancestor for A, B, and C, this would be a common ancestor of only those, and this is a unique ancestor to see. And we would assume, because of what we see has happened through the millennia, that eventually there would be branching in each of these, if we get that far. So this little brief introduction to this evolutionary theory that I am giving you, just a taste for you. One more thing to mention about reading those. There's no difference. Going from bottom to top is different. Going from older to more recent. Going from left to right is not any giving you extra information. It's commutative. So basically, moss can be on the left, moss can be on the right there. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't tell you anything about, oh, the things on the left are more highly evolved. Nothing like that. Going left to right, there is no difference. But if this seemed like, I don't really know much about this topic, and that seems kind of cool, I would like to understand it more. It's changed so much since I was in school. There are great little classes that you can take on the internet, and you just go in. One really simple and accessible one that gives great basic information. You can see on a couple of my slides, I've taken them from this evolution.berkeley.edu. If you want to go more into depth, there are free, full-blown college-level classes that you can go and take on the internet. And you don't even have to take tests. You can just go along and do it and suck in that information and not have to pay thousands of dollars to sit in the classroom with the college kids. Sorry to those of you who are younger. You're not really kids, but to us. So you can see, just looking at this again, there are a few little branches that are outlined in red. Those are extinct lineages. So whatever broke off there didn't make it and is no longer living. We would call those extinct. So there you can see the dinosaurs on the sides. But a lot of these clades really do pretty well reflect some of those old classifications. And we still do use those, and we still use a lot of that terminology. So if we go back to this depiction, you can see the little red over there. That is the clade of animals, Animalia, just like we would have this grouping of Animalia. So animals, as you probably have just that intuitive feeling, is a hugely diverse group, but they do all have something in common. Each one of these groupings has things in common, and then as we go on to another grouping, what happens is they have a little more in common, and so other things will drop out. But all animals, let's see how good you are on your scientific terms here. All animals are eukaryotic. Who knows what that means?
Having a nucleus in their cells as well as organelles.
Yes, excellent. If that means something to you, awesome. If it doesn't matter. You don't need to know that to be a docent, but it's really cool to know more about how these living things are functioning. The things that living things do are amazing, and it's really cool to know about the nuclei. Okay, multicellular. That one's a little easier. What does that mean? All animals are multicellular. That means they have more than one cell. Yeah, too easy, you don't want to answer. That seems silly. But you can go ahead and answer anyway, because speaking out is useful for the learning. What does this mean? Movement. Yeah, they can all move. If you can't move, then you're technically not an animal. Even if you can't tell that you're motile, you still probably are. And heterotrophic, a really, really important word. What does that mean? Okay, I love that you're trying to break it down and look and see what that means by looking at the parts of the word. But that basically means that you cannot manufacture your own source of energy. So plants, we know that they are not going to fit into the animal group because they are homotrophic. They can take care of building the energy source on their own. All animals are dependent on outside sources. All of us. Every animal needs something else. Almost all of us rely on the photosynthesis from plants. There are very few animals that can get their energy from some other sources, but I don't care about that, right?
This is the producers versus consumers.
This is producers versus consumers. And that's such better language for us to be using. And I probably shouldn't even keep that up there, but I want you to have that feel for touching into what you'll read when you go into a scientific article. You want to learn more about these things, and you go and read it. It might seem at first glance a little bit too deep, but then you realize, oh, heterotrophic. That just means consumers. I've got this. I can read this article by this PhD student from Harvard.
Well, Rick, I have a question about that.
Yes.
Because that's the first time I've seen motto. Like a coral are animals, aren't they?
Yep.
And sponges, but they don't necessarily move or.
But they can. And actually, baby corals do move there when they're in the polyp stage. Then
Okay.
they
Yeah,
do.
that's what I just thought.
And the motility can be just like the cell can go into the multi-cells can get into another position slightly, but
So it doesn't mean you have to run. It's
right.
just any
It does
kind of
not
movement.
mean you have to run, but it means that you have some sort of functional control of some type of movement. Okay. So we look here. Here is another phylogenetic representation of the animals. You look on there, there are a lot of different kinds of animals. Anyone see where our mammals are going to fit in? It doesn't say animal because we have to get through another classification that we can get there.
Chordata?
Chordata! Excellent. You see that right there? We're there with the lizards. So all these other different groups, but this is where we're headed. Okay. So here is the chordata. Chordates is the classification that we share with all of these other kind of animals. And more simplified way of looking at it. You can see now that you know how to read this chart. Here are the vertebrates who are all part of chordata, and you can see how they broke off, differentiation in different times, and this is from that same evolution Berkeley site. So all chordates have these things in common. Once again, we're going to have some scientific words here, but they really have meanings that are easy to connect to. So pharyngeal slits. All chordates have openings connecting the inside of the throat to the outside of the neck. What? We're chordates? Where are your gills? So this means at some point in the development, all chordates had pharyngeal slits. Dorsal nerve cord, what's that? So that's the nerve bundle running down the back. It connects the brain with lateral muscles and makes it so that there is a little bit higher level of functionality because the brain can direct that. Every cell doesn't have to know how to direct itself. When you get specialization, then you can do more things. It's like in our society, we have the computer experts who make it so that all the rest of us can use computers, but we don't have to know how to do that. We have the mechanics that make it so that we can all keep our cars running, but we don't know how to do that. If each one of us had to learn all those things, then we wouldn't be able to have that high level. So that's a huge leap in what an animal can do when they have this dorsal nerve cord. All chordates also have a notochord, at least at some point in their development, which is a rod of cartilage that supports the nerve cord underneath, and bilateral symmetry. What does that mean? Yeah, so if you've ever looked at one side of your face and then, like if you look at a mirror, done that trick, it's like, oh, I think this person looks better than that person. Bilateral symmetry doesn't mean that everything is exactly the same on either side, but there is generally the same thing is on either side. Okay, so chordates. Here we have some chordate embryos of various species. Anyone tell what all those are by looking at them? Any guesses? No one's willing to hazard a guess? Even one of them. What could one of these guys be? One is a human. That's right. Okay, I'll show you the development a little further along. A little easier to tell what's happening here. All these chordates that started out with their pharyngeal slits and their notochords and their bilateral symmetry, as they're developing, some of those things will go away, but some of them will stay. So now that we see them closer to their full development, what is this? Go ahead and just shout it out.
Snake.
And you'll find out from me, I'm going to be teaching another class later. I really value participation. I feel like when you're sitting quietly, then you can sometimes go along with the flow and you feel like you're learning it and understanding it. But really, if you're forced to make a response, then it works with a little different part of your brain and helps it to become a little bit more part of you, and you can own that. So I'm going to get you to all just shout out your answer for your guess at what these things are, and then I promise I'll tell you what they really are. So here we have a snake. Thank you for your participation. Not quite everyone is giving their answer, but we'll have to work on that. Okay, what about this guy?
Bird. Panda.
Bear.
Weasel.
Squirrel.
Oh, geez.
Not as many guesses. This one is a little trickier.
Dog.
Gargoyle.
Okay, guesses?
Yeah.
I do think that's where they figured out how to make gargoyles. Okay, so you did pretty well. This is a snake. This is a bird, specifically a chicken. This one, I don't think anyone got it. It's the hardest. It's a possum.
Ah, okay.
This is a cat.
Oh, wow.
Bat.
Bat.
See the wing material there, and yes, that is a human. Okay, so we're ready to go to the object of our study today. One level further, we are up to mammals. I hope you guys can recognize this little group here. This is by far the dominant mammal species here in Placeria. But we do have a lot of other really, really interesting mammals that live here. So what makes all these things mammals? What do they have in common that they don't have in common with that level that we just passed, the chordates? What? Hair. We're going to talk about these things one at a time. So thank you for volunteering this, but we're going to just go in order of my slides to talk about this. So what are we talking about? Endothermy, homeothermy. What is that?
Warm-blooded.
Okay, warm-blooded is what they still called it when I was in school, at least in my lower schooling. But warm-blooded isn't really totally accurate, because some mammals, their normal body temperature is actually pretty cool. And some other animals that are not mammals actually keep their body temperature pretty warm. So since that doesn't tell you that much about the animal, that's why we've gone to using different terms that are more descriptive, that tell you more about what really is happening. So endothermy, you were good before at pulling apart the words and seeing what each part meant. What does that mean?
Internal heat. They're able to
Internal.
regulate their own body temperature.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll see something that is maybe considered even more descriptive, homeothermy. What do you think that would mean?
Same temperature.
Yeah. So mammals have the ability to regulate their body temperature and keep it within its optimal range. Why? Why is that a useful adaptation?
You can live in more environments.
Okay. That is one of the really, really great things. Mammals have been so successful, and you can find mammals everywhere on the earth. They are able to live in more extremes, and it isn't just some mammals are adapted to living in a really cold place and they're the only mammals you find there. I mean, look at humans. You find us all over the place. We can live where it's cold, we can live where it's warm, so it does make it so there are more places that we can live. Why? We like to ask why questions. Why does an animal... Okay, so why do we survive in that when our temperature can be in the same range? What happens to you if you fall into the icy river and your body gets cold?
Shiver.
Okay, first you're going to shiver.
Your
Your heart rate's going to slow down. And eventually your body is not going to be able to survive that cold. Why? It's not like all of a sudden you don't have access to all of that reserve energy that we all carry around to some extent or other. Oh no.
Oh, you hit the wrong
I
button.
just hit the wrong button. Good thing you were there. What is it that makes it... Oh, not easy. Thank you. What is it that makes it so your body is going to lose functionality when it goes out of that temperature range?
homeostasis, isn't that what it's called?
So homeostasis is
maintain.
where we want to try to maintain, but why do we need to maintain? Why can't I just get really cold? Why can't I just get really hot?
For your organs in your brain to function.
For them to function. So they are functioning because there are all these chemical processes that are going on in your body every single moment that you are alive. And most of those processes are able to go forward because in your body there are proteins that have different jobs to do. And one of the important things in this process is enzymes. So since I had all that chemistry background when I was in college, and I still think chemistry is really cool, you know, there are a lot of things that are happening in your body that are chemical reactions that at the temperature of your body, normally those reactions would happen really, really slowly. So slowly that you would die before they finished doing their thing. But in your body, you have all these super, super cool little proteins that have these special shapes to them. And the shape of the protein works so that it bends those chemicals that are part of that reaction so that they can react faster than they normally would. And that reaction can happen so that you can take the molecule of sugar and break the bond and get the energy out of it and use that energy to do what you need to do to survive. And those, I don't know, anyone have eggs for breakfast this morning? And you put the egg that's mostly protein onto the stove and you see the change that happens in that protein. As the temperature changes, the shape of the protein changes, and those enzymes can get too wide, too narrow. They have to be, it's like so exact. It's like a key fitting in a lock. It's so amazing that it's able to do it in every single cell. All those enzymes are doing their thing all the time. But if the key gets bent, then it's not going to fit into the lock. And if that protein of an enzyme is in the wrong temperature, it's not going to be the right shape anymore. Those reactions aren't going to be able to go forward, and you're not going to be able to continue your life's processes. So it's super, super great that mammals are able to keep themselves in that range. And you can see there are a lot of animals that they don't die when they get out of range, but anyone ever seen a lizard trying to walk on a cold day? They can't. They don't have internal regulation, and they're really, really good at knowing how to position themselves to keep their body in the right temperature range, and they know when it's getting out of the range that they better get out of sight, or they are a great easy meal for something else walking along. Because we are able to regulate our temperature, then we don't have to deal with that as much. And there are a couple ways on here that we do regulate temperature. How do mammals cool themselves off if it's getting too hot?
Stand in front of a fan.
And sweating is one of the things that is a unique trait of mammals. We're going to come to that. What about if you're getting too cold?
Shiver.
Why does shivering warm you up?
Friction.
Okay, friction, but also really inside, just like your car engine gets warm when you're running it. When you are shivering, your muscles are doing that work, and their heat is a byproduct of those reactions, and that heat is internalized for you to be able to do it. We also have functions like all mammals are hair. We can raise it to help keep a layer of warm air next to our skin. Some of us are better at that than others. I already mentioned that hair is a characteristic of all mammals. Now, in your book, there are a couple of things that I don't totally agree with. When it talks about hair in there, it says that hair and fur are not the same. Fur is a kind of hair. Biologically speaking, it is. All of these are kinds of hair. Wool is hair. Vibrissae, the little, whiskers on a lot of mammals is hair. Porcupine quills is hair. All these things. It also talks in there, I think, about how not all mammals have hair. It says because some mammals have very little hair when they're in their adult stage, some of the sea mammals, they still have hair at some point in their existence. And so every mammal really does fit that. So why would we bother to have hair? All of these things are adaptations that we've made, but they aren't cheap. If we go back, one thing that I wanted to be sure and mention and talk about that homeostasis. It's really, really great that we can do that, but it is energy intensive. So the per body weight unit, a lizard uses way less energy than any mammal. Snake. There are some snakes. My husband was just watching something about, an anaconda that they can eat a goat. And it said that sometimes when they eat a mammal that large, they don't have to eat for a year. Can you imagine your energy needs being met by a single meal and you don't have to eat again for a whole year? And as mammals, most of us probably wouldn't enjoy that, because food is one of the ways that we get entertainment as well as nourishment. Maybe if we were eating live goats, we would be a little less anxious to have to eat as often. But in any event, it's just like you think about your house. If you want to keep your house in a certain temperature range, that's super great and you can probably do it, but you're going to have a lot higher heating and cooling bills. Our heating and cooling bill for our mammal bodies and homeostasis is much higher than animals that are exothermic. But hair is also something that we spend energy on to produce. It doesn't just automatically come there. Mammals exert some of their resources so that they can have hair. So why do we have it? Here are some hints, and we can talk about this guide. So how do you think hair is helping these little guys?
Helps maintain body temperature.
So it is helping them to stay warm and cool. Yeah, and it depends on the dog, but there are some dogs that people say, oh, in the summer I have to make sure that he gets a short haircut so that he can stay cool. But there are some dogs that it's really not healthy for them to get a short haircut in summer because the coat of fur actually helps them to stay cooler. So both of these guys are also using their fur for another adaptation that hair is useful for. Notice anything about their colorations there?
Camouflage.
Camouflage. So it's easier for organisms to make coloration patterns in their hair generally. That's what mammals do than just on their skin. Although there are a lot of organisms that have really cool ways of making camouflage without it. But hair is valuable to mammals in general for that. Okay, what about this guy? This white tail is not camouflaging him. Why would that be a good use of hair for our little rabbit friend?
So it's signaling other animals?
Okay, signaling is an excellent way that they do it. Actually, our deer here is using his tail. Have you ever seen deers like flipping around their tail? It's like you see the guys with their flags doing it's that same kind of thing, and that is signaling. He's sort of signaling, but he's signaling as a means of protection. How might that little white thing help protect him?
To distract an animal to attack the wrong end as he hops away.
It's distraction, exactly. So that bright white thing, and if you've seen a rabbit that is trying to escape a predator, he doesn't just go, bouncing right along. He'll be boinging here and there, and you think of that white tail flashing around. It can be distracting and useful. Another kind of distraction. Anyone else ever been lucky enough to see a rattlesnake with a squirrel confrontation? So I was at Canyon Country Park one day, quite a few years ago, and there was a rattlesnake coiled on the hill next to a squirrel, and the squirrel's tail was just flashing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And the snake, doesn't have that great of eyesight, and that tail is very distracting, not only for what it's doing visually, but also we think that the heat signature, because there's warmth in that tail, and the snake is trying to figure out where the prey actually is, but that tail is making it so he doesn't know quite where to strike. If the ground snake does strike the squirrel, the California ground squirrel actually, adults have some rattlesnake venom immunity. But I thought that was so exciting seeing that show, and I was there with my kids, and I said, oh guys, let's watch. And at that time, I was having a terrible war with ground squirrels in my garden. It was really, really awful, and I just couldn't wait to see that snake get that squirrel. And I am not kidding, we stood there for 20 minutes, and the impasse was still going on. The snake was still there, and the squirrel was still putting his tail back and forth. Neither one of them had been willing to give up and go away, and my kids were like, come on, Mom. So we had to leave. I don't know what was the result of that. Okay, so we have distraction as one of the uses of hair. What about this?
Attraction.
Attraction. It isn't only other animals, and humans do it too, but the hair is a big attractant for a lot of the mammal mating rituals. What's this guy doing with his hair?
Stay away.
Yes, it's another kind of a signal, but this is a warning. Stay away from me or you're not going to be happy. What about these specialized hairs?
Sensing the environment.
Really, really useful for sensing. Okay, I don't know if you can tell, this is a bear. He's got a bee box. What's his hair doing for him?
Protection.
Hair, so valuable for protection. My husband has noticed that there isn't very much mammal hair left on the top of his head, and he really notices the lack of protection, not only in the sun, but in the house, something touches his head and it's bleeding. And the hair on a lot of mammals is hugely valuable to their survival. Human mammals don't have as much hair, but even the little amount we have helps us out with that. And we already talked about our deer there. Okay, here is another characteristic of mammals. We all have sudoriferous and sebaceous glands. Two different kinds of glands. Someone know which one is sweat and which one is oil?
Sebaceous is oil.
Yep, sebaceous is the oil. The sudoriferous is the sweat. Helpful for some of those things that mammals are trying to do?
Cool.
Mhm.
It's what?
Cool, and also help take care of our skin and our hair in multiple ways. Let's get to the gist of our naming too. All mammals have mammary glands. So we get our names, and that does include all mammals, even the mammals that are separate from our kind of mammal birthing strategy. So we do have the monotremes that are still egg-laying mammals, and they have mammary glands. We have the group of marsupials that have young that are very, very undeveloped and carry them in a pouch animals. In the pouch, we find mammary glands, and then all other adult mammals also. Another characteristic of mammals, all mammals have a diaphragm. So why do we even have to put this on the list? Big deal. Why is a diaphragm useful? What is a diaphragm? If you didn't know before, you can be like a good scientist and use the clues in front of you and figure it out. What is a diaphragm?
It's a pump.
It's a pump. Fantastic. That is really its valuable use. So we do need a higher energy input so that we can keep up with all these super cool mammal adaptations. And that pump that helps to facilitate the bringing in of oxygen and the expulsion of carbon dioxide is very valuable in being able to feed that need for energy. All living things, including plants, use some sort of respiration. You can reach back into your past and see if this looks familiar. We think of plants as doing photosynthesis, but they do photosynthesis so that they have the tools that they can also do respiration, because this is the main source of energy for most living things. We take glucose and oxygen, and in that glucose there are energy-rich bonds. With the help of enzymes and other processes, we can break those bonds, and we wind up with carbon dioxide, water, and energy. We can use that energy in our body, but we need some way to get the oxygen in and the carbon dioxide out. The diaphragm helps it so we can do that. I mean, how often do you need to even think about, oh man, I've got to get some oxygen. Oh man, I got to get rid of some carbon dioxide. Oh man, I got to get some oxygen. We have to think about that all the time. Your diaphragm is at work from the time you're born, helping you to do that in a really efficient way. We also want to put in here that all mammals have 3 middle ear bones. Now that was important to our growing understanding of what mammals are, because a lot of the fossil record doesn't include any remnant of soft tissue. We have some remnants of soft tissue, but it's much, much harder to have that preserved than it is to have bones. And somewhere in the history, the single bone that we can find in reptiles in the edge of the jaw changed to these 3 little bones that every single one of you has in your ears right now. Now, why Why do you think this would be a useful adaptation to those mammals? Anyone know anything about the hearing capacity of most reptiles? Do you think they hear as well as most mammals or not as well? Good guess. Not as well. So this change made it so our hearing could be much more acute, and it also made it so we think early mammals were basically nocturnal creatures, and you can imagine at night hearing can be very valuable. There isn't as much light that is going to help a sight organ, but a hearing organ can get by a lot better than. To this day, most mammals actually are nocturnal.
You think are you going to go on with this, or are you going to go to something else besides
Oh,
yours?
do you have something else to say?
I was just curious. I've never considered that, but do you know birds? Do they have the three? I'm trying to think which groups of animals have the best hearing. And is it mammals, or is it birds, or does it depend?
So it depends. A lot of birds do have really good hearing. They hear in a different way. They don't have the same ear setup.
Because we talk about, I know with the barn owl, what it's got the offset ears, and they can hear in 3 dimension or something like that.
A lot better than we humans can, but there are a lot of mammals that hear better than humans also. We all have our specializations, and there are some mammals that are amazingly sighted, and humans are just generally pretty good at almost everything. But we can't run as fast as the fastest mammals, and we can't see as well as the best sighted ones. We can't hear as well as the best hearing ones. But our brains are so developed that we are able to put it all together and be the dominant organism on Earth.
Except we can create tools to exceed
Yes.
everything the others can
Which
do.
comes down to the brain.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's no other mammal that can see on a microscopic level the way we can, even though our natural eyes don't do that. I have a son who is he's a laser physicist, and one of the things that he worked on for quite a while was a laser that makes super, super short pulses, short enough that it's kind of like a camera. Your shutter opens and closes, and if whatever you're trying to take a picture of is moving and the shutter doesn't close fast enough, then it's going to be a blur. Well, that laser was basically being turned into a camera that eventually will be able to take pictures on an atomic level. I mean, well, not my brain, but some mammal brains are able to put together those things so that we can have this understanding and this specialization of duty for progressing our societies, this ability to work together. Most mammals actually also are solitary and not communal as humans are, but that isn't a biological adaptation, so we can't put that on the list of things that mammals share. Here's another mammal characteristic. We all have heterodont dentition. Okay, you can be guessing, pulling apart your words again. Hetero, many are different. And dentition, teeth. Yep. So all mammals, other organisms, sometimes they have teeth that are really cool. When the old ones wear out, then they just go away and new ones grow in. I would love that because I have some old teeth that I would be happy to get rid of with some shiny new ones. But mammals have teeth that specialize for what they are doing, and the dentition pattern for mammals is unique to their species. I mean, there are some species that have the same as each other, but there are 4 different kinds of teeth. There are the incisors, the ones in the front, the canines that are more famous. There are premolars and there are molars. Most mammals have one set of teeth that they are either born with or come in later when they're children, and then as the jaw grows, then they have the ability to get rid of those tiny teeth and grow some more teeth that are bigger that will fit the jaw and make it so that they can still be good chompers in their adult stage. But the premolars and the molars, they look kind of similar. Technically, the premolars have 2 faces and the molars have 4. But since each species has its own pattern for dentition, let's see, it's on this, yeah. So I have a jaw here, and you can see the different teeth, and there are some wacky looking numbers up here. This is the dentition pattern that you find in every normal animal of this type. Can you tell if this is a lower jaw or an upper jaw? So usually an upper jaw is connected with the rest of the skeletal part. The lower jaw, you can feel on your own. It has these 2 bones that run along the side and the teeth are connected to it. So you can see that here. Let's see if we can count these teeth first, and then we'll look at our numbers and tell what they're doing. So we're just going to count on the side. You can see the little connection here between those 2 sides of the jaw. It's almost like they're just glued together there, which they kind of are. But okay, so here we have the incisors, the front ones, and on one side we have how many of those?
3.
And here is a canine.
1.
And the premolars.
4.
And then the molars. 3 or 4. So this is one giant one.
Oh.
One big molar and a small molar, and a teeny tiny molar.
3.
So this is a dentition pattern, and for different mammals, since it is characteristic of the species, you can have a chart, and you will have a chart momentarily, that can tell you what to expect from this kind of animal. So the top and the bottom are often different, but not always. And you might see it written like this, or you might see it written like this. This is the pattern for the top jaw, and this is the pattern for the bottom jaw. So 3, 1, 4, 3, that's what we saw, 3, 1, 4, 3. Or you might see it written in this manner. So the first one would be the incisors. You always go, it's just one side of the mouth, and it's starting in the front and going toward the back. So this would be 3 on the top and 3 on the bottom incisors, 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom canine. Not all animals have all of these teeth, and so you could find a 0 on some of those things. I'm wondering, we're close to our break time. I have some jawbones that I would like you to play with and try to identify. But I wonder if maybe I'll just get that set up for you while you take your break, and then you can come back. Does that sound good? Or are you so excited to get to those jaws that you maybe you would rather do that after you've been eating? I don't know how squeamish you are. But you'll get to play with some bones if you go to the Mammals table too. We'll do that. When you come back, I'll have some bones and some dentition charts on your table. And I'd like you to go ahead and try to identify the jaws that you have on your table according to the dentition chart that I will have on there for you. And so we will be expecting to start up again at about 10:30. Sound good?
Thanks you.
Even though we're changing the way that we think about animal classifications, once again, a lot of the basics still apply. Sorry. And in the mammal group, it's broken up into these animals that are more closely related with one another. Not all these groups are found around here, but many of them are. Continuing in the old classification, we would come down to order. Philip came over And here are some mammalian orders. Looking at just one example, we have the order of Carnivora, going down to family. You see some that are pretty familiar to you. Most people know those families of the cat family and the dog family and the bear family. And then below that is the genus and the species. And these, of course, are the names that we use to specifically identify animals scientifically, so we know what we're talking about. Even today, a lot of regional names exist. I think I've never been able to track down all of them, but I've read that there are 23 different names for a mountain lion. Depends on where you are, what you would call it. But we know that it has its own specific name that we can identify, and every scientist can know exactly what animal you're talking about if you use the genus and the species name. You notice I did make a modification to the little chart that I found, though, because it had the wrong species name for the bear on the chart, which does happen because as we have learned more and more, first we were just trying to classify animals and understand them by what we could see about how they looked and how they acted and maybe where they lived. And then as we were able to study more about the fossil record, that helped us to learn more about how they were related to each other. But now, with the recent advances, really we can call it recent in understanding genetics, we can pinpoint much more closely how things have changed and what the relationships are between things. And there are plenty of things that just in the last few years we've said, whoa, we thought that those animals were cousins, and now we can tell that they are not related at all. They each need their own genus. They each need a new name for themselves because the names don't reflect their appropriate relationships. And I am going to, as we're talking, in your book you have a list of the mammals of Placerita, and some of those mammal names are incorrect in there, and if you would like that list to reflect the current appropriate naming, you can change those names, but if you're never going to look at that and you don't care, then you're welcome to as they are. But you can understand why it has been so challenging for us to learn more about genetics when you look at the sheer volume of these numbers that we're talking about. So a human has about 30 trillion cells, and inside each one of those cells you have a double strand of DNA that is, if you're talking about a diploid cell, there are over 6 billion base pairs in there. I mean, these numbers are hard to even wrap our heads around there. I know that we talk a lot about there's so much genetic similarity between living things. People are so similar to each other, but the difference between two people, just because that 6 billion number is so giant, in a haploid cell, which has over 3 billion base pairs, you would expect between any two humans to have approximately 20 million differences. That's why we can identify people with pretty good accuracy by having just a tiny little bit of their DNA, because even though two humans are mostly alike and extremely similar, they still have over 20 million differences in their DNA. So you've probably seen these, or at least heard these numbers. It's really hard to just put an exact number on this, because how do you measure this? A lot of times the differences are that, so some of these differences that are measured as you're going along in the base pairs, and it's like instead of a a certain base here, there's a different one substituted. So that's easy to say, okay, that's one difference. And in this one, it's like if you had a string of words and there is a letter different in this word and a letter different in that word, that's easy to say, okay, we can count those differences. But what if this letter string has 2 words added and this letter string has 3 words subtracted? How do you exactly count those differences? There's no convention that we've been able to agree on yet to say exactly what that is. So basically these numbers are mostly talking about the DNA that we can look at, which ones are different letters associated. But in any case, you can see that life has a lot of connection. I mean, even plants are, these are so big approximations, but have a lot of saying. And you can see as we learn more about it, and we can take apart and look at the DNA coding for 2 given animals, instead of just saying, wow, an elephant and a mouse are really different, we can start to say, well, how different are they? And it's a lot easier, instead of saying, well, that's a big difference or a small difference, to be able to say, well, in this part of the gene coding region, there are this many base substitutions, there are this many differences, and so you can quantify it instead of just using those words that don't have an exact meaning. And so as we've been studying those things more, then you can take this, and obviously you look at this picture, and it's easy with these particular organisms to say, oh yeah, a mouse and a rat are a lot more similar than they are to a frog. So if we were looking at our chart, we would put the mouse and the rat as closer cousins and the frog there. But what if we wanted to quantify that? We have just a tiny little string of the DNA coding. We could start to say, well, how many differences are there? If we compare this string, so this first line, with the second line, we can see that if we went along and looked, G and C, oh, there's one difference. A and A, T and A, there's another difference. Altogether, there are 6 differences between number 1 and number 2. There are 6 differences between number 2 and number 3. And there's 1 difference between number 1 and number 3. And so then we can say, oh, these guys are pretty close cousins, and this one is quite different from either of those. And that's just on such a surface level what is happening. If this is something interesting to you, go on the internet and learn more about it. This is more the level of classification that we deal with here in Placerita. We cannot see the genetic code for any of the animals. We probably don't even see the animals very often, but we can see evidence of the animals around us, and so that is what we're more likely to be wanting to learn more about when we are out on the trail. So we will talk a little bit more about some of those signs specific that we're likely to see, but I just wanted to give you a quick word of caution as we go through, and we're going to talk about the mammals that do make their home in Placerita Canyon. You might find some that seem interesting to you, and you might be ready to jump out there and start doing your own research. I hope you do, but of course, we do know that on the internet, not everything is believable. Sorry to let you down. I hope you knew that, but so if you, let's say the opossum catches your fancy and you go and you want some information about an opossum, you can start to get a good feel just from the start of looking at an article, whether it's going to be scientific and something that you are going to count on or not. I come to this right away, you see the dangers of opossums. Are you thinking, okay, high science here, let's go for this one? No, probably not. There are a lot of things like that, and sometimes you can read those articles to see what the person is saying or for entertainment, but that's not where you're going to put all your marbles. I'm sorry to tell you, but all of the docents in Placerita Canyon aren't all either going to always give you totally accurate information. There are some things that no one knows for sure, and one docent might have one opinion, one docent might have another opinion, and if you hear that and you wonder, go home and research it and get your own opinion, and you live by that one. There's some information that is outdated that some docents might still be talking about. We try to be as accurate as possible, but you can't judge by what a docent says that it is the very latest science and rely on it 100%. But as you work as docents yourselves, you can refine your own knowledge so that you can get better and better and be more accurate. And when it really comes down to it, when you're telling a second grader some opossum facts, if you have something that isn't 100% true, does it really matter? I mean, it's better to be as accurate as possible, but it's not going to scar that person for life. It's not going to make it so they fail their PhD orals or anything. So just try to look for things that are more accurate. What do you think about this, going on Wikipedia? Who thinks that Wikipedia is a good source of information? Raise your hand. Who doesn't? Who didn't vote? You got to take a stand sometimes if you're going to be able to move forward in getting your knowledge. So I personally am a big Wikipedia fan. Wikipedia is a tool that brings an accessible level of knowledge to a huge group of people, and Wikipedia is a platform that is policed by the people. If you go on Wikipedia and you see something that is wrong, guess what? You have the power to change that. And Wikipedia has gotten really pretty good. There are experts that go on all the time, and in their field they make those changes so that it gets better and better and better. It's like, the water that is running through the mountains and getting purified as it goes through, and there is a lot of fantastic information available there. There's a lot of really great reference there, so if you read something there and you want to learn more about it, follow the trails in the end. Become a Wikipedia editor yourself, and you can help that. It's really, really easy to do, and we can make it even a better tool. Yes?
So if you make a change or you go into that edit mode, I haven't done it before, but does that get reviewed by the people that wrote the article to begin with?
It depends on how significant of a change it is, and it depends on the nature of the article. So there are some articles that are considered to be more open to speculation and difference of opinion, and those type of articles tend to be policed more carefully. If you went into an article on, there's a Wikipedia about Placerita Canyon. If you went into there and you just added a couple sentences, or you cleaned up some of the poor grammar that a prior editor used, it probably won't be policed. But if you find something that is amiss, or you don't like what another article is doing, then you can report that, and the person that was making those changes can be on alert, so that if that person makes other changes, then it will be adjudicated. And so it really is something that is a powerful knowledge tool. You can't rely on it 100%, but what can you rely on 100%, especially in science? Science is growing and changing all the time.
A lot of times there are alerts about an article
That's right.
that you see when you open it. Almost like warnings.
Definitely like warnings. And you also can see on a lot of articles, it will say, this doesn't meet our standards. Are you someone who can improve it? Please do. And it's nice to know that right when you go to the page. So if you look for those clues, then you can also have an idea about it. And they also try to keep it so it's a level of writing that is accessible to the lay public. If things get too technical, then they get dinged and flagged for revision.
Just remember that editable. So for example, Ron could go in there today and say, Virginia opossums are dangerous, and back out. So if if that's not noticed, and you go in and look at it later, you say, oh, look at that, they're dangerous. So you should check more than once.
So you should, and absolutely, if you find something mentioned one time on the internet, then it's a lot less reliable. If you find, have your own logical facilities on alert when you're looking anywhere. If someone on the street tells you something, you don't necessarily just believe it, but if 10 people come up and tell you the same thing, then it has more believability. Take it for what it is, but also if you are reading and you notice someone put on here that opossums are dangerous, then you can look and find out, oh, Ron Krause wrote that, and you can have an alert put on his name. This guy is writing fallacious things on the Wikipedia. You better be careful about the edits that he makes. And then for a while, he probably would be, the things that he was making would be second, they would get a second look. So, I don't know. I like it, but I don't just rely 100% on what I read on Wikipedia. It's a fantastic starting place. And then go out from there. There are all kinds of really great, filled with knowledge sites that are sponsored by the government and by universities. If you want to learn more, you have options, no matter what. And so
all those other sources are referenced in Wikipedia.
Right, they are, and that is where you can go to them. And so one of the documents in your book also is one that I think was researched a while ago, and I don't agree with all the information that's on it. I do have a replacement copy of that for you later if you're interested in placing it. But here we have our resident Virginia opossum. You can see this quote from John Smith back in 1608, talking a little bit about what the opossum is like. From time to time, we do have opossums that are showable to our groups. We don't currently have one available, but a lot of people that come here will have had experience. Anyone here ever seen a live opossum in your neighborhood? Yeah, fairly common, and they're slow enough moving that when they're in your yard, a lot of times you will actually see them. So what's unusual about this animal? What do you know about the Virginia opossum?
They typically dead without warning.
Okay.
The body just goes into self-protection mode.
So one of its protective modes is to actually seem dead. Probably, as they've studied them more, it probably doesn't happen as often as people tend to think it does, but yeah, something very interesting about it. You had something about the opossum.
They're the only marsupial north of Mexico in the Americas.
That's
There's
right.
a bunch of different types of opossums in like Mexico and Central America, but there's just one in the US.
You're right. Good opossum facts. Anyone else have something they want to add about our friend the opossum? I still remember when one of my daughters was really little, she came running through the house. Mom, there's a giant rat outside! A giant rat? There was an opossum just walking by. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, they give live birth and then the babies crawl up and go into their pouch. And I guess they only so many are allowed to go in, a certain amount. And I'm not sure of the amount, but the others will pass away if they don't make it into the pouch.
Yeah.
Length of time.
So they have to make it into the pouch in the first place, and they apparently can give birth to up to 20, but they don't usually give that many. And there are, I think, 13 nipples.
I think that's
And sometimes all the nipples aren't even functional, but the babies just crawl in there. They're basically on their own, and you might see them when they're a little older, riding around on the mother's back, which, even if they're ugly animals, you gotta admit that's pretty cute.
You know, a surprising fact, and how many of you individuals will learn this, because we do, as Vicki said, occasionally we get an opossum here as an animal that we can show. but they don't live very long. Surprised that they live maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and it really upsets a lot of the docents here because we come to love these animals, even though we're not supposed to treat them as pets. You know, they get names, and our docents love them, and particularly some docents, you know, they bring them out all the time, and oh, look at this, and then, then they die, and then everybody's so sad. But you know, it always surprises me because, you know, they're about the size of a cat or a dog, and a cat or a dog will live 10, 15 years or longer. But for whatever reason, these animals are very short-lived. And so if we do get one, and it's dead before you get a chance to see, well, you know, obviously, but they just don't live that long, which is really, really surprising to me.
Unusual for mammals their size, but there are a lot of cool things about them. They do have that prehensile tail, and when I lived in Michigan, I did actually see a mother and her babies lined up hanging from the tree branch, which supposedly they don't do that very often, but I saw it, so I know it happens sometimes. Their little hands makes it so that they make tracks that are pretty easy to tell. Since you were just working with teeth, they have an unusual dentition pattern, and a possum has 50 teeth. That's the most of any mammals around here, at least. So nocturnal, usually, like most mammals. Okay, anyone know what this animal is?
There you go.
Mouse.
No guesses? It does look a lot like a mouse.
Ornate shrew.
Are you cheating? Just kidding. This is an ornate shrew. And shrews look a lot like mice. They're much more closely related to actually moles and hedgehogs, which we don't have here, but I wish we did because that's a cute animal. This is an animal that has a pretty high metabolism, so they have to eat a lot. Average about 40% of their body weight a day.
Jeez.
Can you imagine if we had to eat that much? Okay, you better know who this is. There is our broadfoot mole. So this one, when Ron first found the specimen that you were passing around earlier, the feet were spread out more so you could see how cool they are, but as it contracted in. But so when Ron was able to find this mole here, which is kind of interesting because some of the experts in the area had said, I don't even think moles live in Placerita anymore because I don't see the evidence. Well, they're way underground. They're insectivores, and they just they don't need to come out. And one of the really, really cool things about moles to me is that in order to facilitate that respiration, you know, we have hemoglobin that is, I once had a college class in hemoglobin. We spent a full college semester studying about hemoglobin and how it does what it's supposed to do. And it's so cool because it has just the exact right adaptations that when it's in the oxygen-rich environment of the lungs, it lets go of the carbon dioxide and picks up the oxygen. And when it gets to the cells that need more oxygen, it's able to change its shape so that it lets go of the oxygen and picks up the carbon dioxide. So pretty crazy that it's able to do that. There are animals that their hemoglobin is specifically adapted to their living conditions. So this little mole, who's underground most of the time in areas where there isn't a great oxygen exchange, is really, really great at picking up that oxygen even when it's in a low oxygen environment and being able to get rid of the carbon dioxide at the right time. But when Ron had the experience of finding that mole, it prompted him to go and do some mole research. And so you can tell us a couple of the mole facts that you picked up while
Well, yeah, I did, and I went on Wikipedia, so I know it's true. No, but it was good, you know, because I never really thought too much about moles, but a couple of interesting facts. They have an extra thumb. They have 2 thumbs on each of their front feet, which I know that picture doesn't necessarily show it. But what I thought was interesting, they, and I don't know if necessarily the moles we have here, but moles do have a slight venom, and what they can do is they, well, one thing, and I want you to all remember this, because I always put this question, when in the summertime we have our Are You Smarter Than a Placerita 5th Grader? Now one of the questions is always on that test, which of these following animals is not a rodent? And I put mouse, and I put vole, and I put some whatever. But I always put mole. A mole is not a rodent. As Vicky, it's a special class of mammal insectivores, and I don't know what the scientific name is for that. But shrews and moles they're not rodents. Okay, remember that. Secondly, they do have some of them have mild venom, and what they can do is they inject their venom into the earthworms. They like to eat earthworms. They're carnivores mostly, and what it does, it sort of paralyzes the earthworm, and then they put them in what they call a larder or a storage area. And from there, they can it's like a refrigerator. They can come back and eat them later. And some scientists have dug up mole larders, and there's been like over 100 earthworms, and they're being stored for later. So when they go back and eat it later on, they take the earthworms out, and with their teeth and their snout, however they do it, they just kind of squeeze the earthworm, and they get all the dirt, because earthworms, they have that line of dirt that goes through them. They squeeze all the dirt out, and so they just get the meat. So, a fascinating fact you can learn about stuff just from Wikipedia. And finding that drowned little mole out there really prompted me to do some research. So I encourage you all, when you find something, do a little research. You'll find all kinds of interesting things.
That was good coming today.
Well, thank you, Lynn.
By the way, when you were on the Tatavian food, another thing that they like to eat was earthworms.
You know what I like about this picture? If you know the term jazz hands.
Add that to
There you go.
And they don't just have larders and little places where they have long travel trails too, between the different places that they might have, places that are maybe above the water table normally, larders, but those travel trails and in some parts of the country, those travel trails traverse your lawn.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And they're just under the surface, and you can always tell when there's moles.
Well, see, that's the classic that we're talking about. They use, I've seen mole. It's like in lawns, you see those little humps, but around here, I've never seen those little
But
humps.
it's not just a hump; it's a trail. It's a
yeah.
long.
In the springtime, under the snow.
They make
Right.
like tunnels.
But the ones that live around here, because of the conditions in Placerita, they're less likely to make those surface little bumps that you see them going along there. And they can get quite deep underground, but they do need to have that source of insects. And so if there isn't some moisture, then the insects aren't living and they aren't either. But apparently those really well-constructed tunnels moles don't like to be around each other, but when one mole moves out, maybe the tunnel system for our little freezer friend has already been found by another mole that has taken that over as part of his territory. But those tunnels, they also said that sometimes they call them even worm traps, because the worms are going through and then they come to this hole and they fall down, and the mole senses, oh, dinner's here, like, ding dong, pizza guy. But yeah, they can run down and get it.
Well, it's funny too, just to finish up on Wikipedia, when you look at moles, and this is typical, or to Google, if you Google moles, mole the animal, not moles on your skin and stuff like that. But the first thing that pops up is, exterminators. How to get rid of moles, how to kill moles, It seems like the first thing that pops up on Wikipedia with a lot of animals.
With a lot of animals, it's true.
Vicki, the little pond down here was right near where we found the little mole the other day. And right across from the pond, looking back towards the parking lot, is that you can see a trail that you were talking about, the raised granite. It may still be there, I don't know.
Really?
The rain.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's real obvious. It looked like it raised up about 2 inches,
Oh.
little hump, and it's going like this.
It's
It
like a
could have been
tunnel.
his house,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Just walk down there and see if it's still there, I don't know. But Robert's garden down there, I'm sure has a whole bunch of them in there.
Well, it does stay moisture there.
Yeah.
Okay, what do we have here? You don't even have to tell me the exact kind it is. Everyone knows. And you have to admit, it's pretty cute.
Another question on
Pretty
bats.
amazing. Yes.
Are you smarter than a fifth grader? I'm giving you guys a lot of information. Okay, write this down. Bats are, I think, the most, as far as species of mammals, one of the most numerous in Placerita Canyon. I think we have like 8 species of bats or something, which surprised me. I mean,
They're on your list.
yeah, they're on the list.
And we actually have a picture of each one of them coming up here. But I have this guy just because he has his wings spread and you can get a cool look. So you can see here's his arm, and these are his fingers. that are coming here, that there's the thumb pointing up out of the top, really undeveloped legs. A lot of bats can't even really get around well on the ground. Some bats, if they're on the ground, they are unable to get back up into flight, but not the ones that we have around here. But you can see all the super great circulation that is here. These wings are really useful at temperature control, but these fingers are extra flexible, and bats are amazing flyers. They have so much control over the contours of their wings that they're going through, that they can do things that we still can't even figure out how they're doing it. Such an interesting animal. That one is the big brown. Here's one that it's been changed from your list. If you see in your book, we're going to be going along in order of the mammals of Placerita. It's actually a list that was compiled for multiple parks in the area, and you can see on the key the ones that are supposed to be here, the ones that used to be here, or maybe not, but we're going to take a look at each one of those. This western pipistrelle is one of our residents that is incorrectly identified in your list, so if you are interested in changing that, it is Parastrellus. We can tell that it's not related to the other animals in its old classification. While we're talking about that, I do have some bat cutouts. So the western pipistrelle is probably a bat that you have seen even if you didn't realize it, because these bats are usually the first in and the first, or the first out and the last in. They're a really small bat, and they have a very erratic kind of flight pattern, and sometimes people think, whoa, that was a giant moth. They're never purple, but that is the color. They're super lightweight. So you know how the old copper pennies weigh more than the current pennies? It's like 3.2 grams for the old ones and 2.7 or 8 grams, I don't remember. This one, its average adult weight is about the weight of 2 of the old style pennies. But I have paper clips on this one if you're interested in feeling it. But they have these short wings that make them so they're really maneuverable, but they stay low. A lot of times they do a lot of their feeding on the ground. And they can fly as slowly as 5 miles an hour. That's actually a feat. To fly slowly is as difficult as flying quickly. But they are so great, and they live here year-round. And you probably had time to copy that if you wanted to. Here's another one that is incorrectly identified. In your book, they actually have the species name of the eastern redbat instead of the desert or the western redbat that we have around here. These ones are kind of cool because they're solitary, and they like to roost in trees. They don't always go back to the same tree, just the one that they choose for the day. But they hang by 1 foot, and they're all curled up, and they really do look like just a little dead leaf there. You can walk past it a dozen times and not even notice that it is there. But this bat, like other bats, is able to live in really arid places. Bats are able to live in really cold places, really dry places, really hot places. They are some of the creatures that have been able to adapt to all kinds of things. So here are the bats of Placerita. You can see the California leaf-nosed bat. This bat and the pallid bat, both of them live in the desert as well as here, and they do something unusual. Even though they mostly eat insects, both of these bats have been known to also drink cactus nectar. And they will occasionally also eat the cactus fruit, but this pallid bat, even though I'm not in order, well, I'm just saying that, going into the cactus, they realized just in the last few years that he's one of the best pollinators of the cactus, because in order to get the nectar, he doesn't have an adaptation of a long tongue. He has to put his whole body into the flower, and the fur around his face picks up the pollen, and then when he goes to the next flower, he's a great deliverer of that flower. So they think that he is one of the great instruments in that pollination. But we'll keep going around the clockwise. So the long-eared myotis and the California myotis. Here is the western pipistrelle that we were already talking about some. The big brown bat that we saw on the very first one. These guys are, along with a couple of these bats, they actually do some migration. But our climate is good enough that they can spend a lot of time around here. But they can fly at 40 miles an hour, which is the big difference between these that fly at 5 miles an hour. And we have stretched out. The red bat, the one you saw before, was all curled up like the leaf. Look how different he looks when he's stretched out. This bat, the hoary bat, we have one of them taxidermied in the museum. So you can go and see it out there. Hoary bats are really amazing. The hoary title comes from this frostiness that you see on the fur. And these guys can be found in some really cold places too. The hoary bats are very widespread, but they actually are one of the bats that has been most negatively impacted by wind turbines. So you've read about that issue that the wind turbines, yay, it's really great that they help us have clean energy, but they also are a hazard for some flying animals. And at first they couldn't figure out why were the bats being killed by them so much. The hoary bats like to go to a tall place and perch, and so they think that partly they're going to get close because that looks like such a nice tall outlook, and when they go in, they get taken out by the things. But also they're so smart, they're curious, and they think that they're just going to explore and will be taken out. But beyond that, they have realized that the sensitive lungs of a lot of bats, that when the turbine is spinning, the air pressure changes, and that air pressure change can burst their poor little lungs and make it so they can't breathe anymore. And then having a diaphragm doesn't help them out anymore, and they die. So it's kind of interesting. They can cut the mortality of these bats and others by 80 to 90% if they don't let the wind turbines spin when they're going to be spinning really slowly. When they're spinning faster, then it's more of an obvious hazard and they don't go near. But when they're spinning at the low speed, that's when it takes out more of the bats. And when it's spinning really slowly, they don't get that much power from them anyway. And so a lot of the turbine companies have volunteered to not allow them to spin when they're below a certain rate. But it's kind of like they say, okay, well, we won't let them spin when they come up to here, which takes out some of the hazard. But really, if they would just not let them spin, if they came up to this until they got to this speed, then it would be able to save almost 90% of that mortality, we think. So they're still in the stage of saying, well, we're going to take care of this ourselves. You don't have to regulate us. We're going to do it. We'll see what happens. But this really amazing animal. And all of these animals do take out so many insects. I think it's so around by us, the western pipistrelles don't usually live in bigger groups, but they can. It's not that they are that social, but they will sometimes congregate. But when they're in a larger group, they have been able to show that they can take out 250,000 pounds of insects in a night of feeding. These bats, some of them can eat nearly their own weight, which is small, but you think of how many insects, and these animals can take out mosquitoes too. You know, a lot of insects we really could do with fewer, and they are so helpful in keeping that balance. Really great for crops. The hoary bat also is a really great flyer, and one of the things that he does when he's flying, he'll come up behind an insect, and he doesn't like the head and the wings, and he has enough control. He sort of turns his tail underneath so the flight of the insect is disrupted, and he can bite off just the body, and the wings and the head go floating down to the... Yes.
Just a quick comment is, we used to have a very large population of bats living near here over on Disney Ranch. And as that population has declined, Disney Ranch has seen a tremendous increase in the amount of insects that they have over there. And the other thing that I find very interesting about bats is that when they go to eat something, imagine their wings or fingers, they actually scoop up with their wings. They scoop up and put it to their mouth, the insect that they're getting. So they do their jerky flight, and when they get there, they go right to their mouth.
So cool. So crazy. And so useful to us. We need to value them and what they do. There's some other super cool bat fact I was going to share, but I don't remember what I was going to say, so you'll just have to discover it for yourself when you go home to learn more about bats.
Bats, and one of the issues with bats being declining was there's some sort of a disease, white nose or something like that. Is that in California, or do you know? Or
so that the white nose syndrome is a lot more prevalent where there are a lot of bats roosting together. In our area, in more arid places, they're less likely to do that. And also, since it's not as moist around here, we think that's another reason that fungus doesn't grow. It has been seen here, but it isn't as big a problem. Actually, though, that's gotten so much press nationwide. The number of bats that have died from that is lower than the number that have died from wind turbines.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that goes under the radar more. And it's so hard for us trying to balance our interests in clean energy and protecting our animal life that really are part. We never know what animal that we take out of the food chain might be the key that can make the whole rest of it crumble. And we can totally see how important bats are to the relationship between a lot of different things. But you know, even worrying about insects that are around, there's been an enormous decline in the number of insects worldwide, ways that it's really hard to measure and know exactly how many there are. But like there was something fairly recently in a study from Germany where they had some protected areas, and they thought since these areas are so protected, then we know that the ecosystem is going to be thriving and we won't be worrying about the collapse of some of these underspecies as much. And in a 30-year period, the biomass of insects had gone down, even in those protected areas, something like 60%. Like, it was a really shockingly horrible number. And who's going to notice that much if our insect population is crashing? That is the basis of so many factors in our ecosystem that we're all a part of. We might not know until it's too late. And so we just have to be the ones that are careful about making these little decisions that can support the continued existence of these important species. And we are glad that we have so many cool bats here in Plaza Rita. Here's just a picture of a pallid bat spread out. Sorry, this is this one is the pallid bat. Who is that guy? I don't remember just from looking at him. But I brought you this one because you were talking the other day in the insect class about the bark scorpions and how potent they are. Not to our little desert friend, that's one of his favorite foods. He eats scorpions and they don't hurt him. Okay, 3 kinds of rabbits and hares around here. The brush rabbit is the least common, looks very similar to the desert cottontail. The black-tailed jackrabbit is actually a hare. What is the difference between a hare and a rabbit?
Back legs, longer ears.
They do have longer legs and ears. One of these is a baby hare and one is a baby rabbit. Anyone know which is which?
Rabbit's on top.
So, in birds, you did have the bird class, right?
Yes.
You probably talked a bit about precocial and altricial, meaning the precocial, they're ready to run at birth, basically, and altricial. There's no such thing as, oh, this species is only this and this species, because it's a gradation. Would you say that a baby human is altricial or precocial? It's certainly not ready to do its own thing and take care of itself, not for a long time. But it is born with hair, it's born with its eyes open, it's able to hear at birth, so it's further along than that is, but on a scale. And most animals that are born and need more teaching and nurturing are going to turn out to have a little bit more brain capacity. If you are, the animals that are born ready to go, like the hares, are expected generally to not need as much development for the things that they will.
Those are 2 good words to learn too. Those may be on your test. Okay. 2 good vocabulary words.
So you know the difference? I mean, it's pretty easy just with common words, the precocial at least, because if you have a precocious child, then you know that they're ahead of their development and expectations, which I'm sure all of you were. Okay, here are our squirrels and chipmunks. This one you won't see as much in the area. This is our native gray squirrel. The Miriam's chipmunk. I don't see a lot of them around here.
The chipmunk, we do have the Miriam's chipmunk. You don't see them. Usually you have to go further up the canyon trail.
Mm-hmm, right, I have seen them there. And that is one that the genus is incorrect in your thing if you want to put the neo-Eutaneus instead of just the Eutaneus. The fox squirrel is an interloper. The fox squirrel is native to the east, but it's very, very well established in our area here. It's pretty well documented that fox squirrels probably came to Southern California when some veterans in the early 1900s brought their pets with them because they liked them, and they also like the gray squirrel is not as adapted to having people around it, and so they like the idea that you can train the squirrel to come and take a peanut out of your hand, or if you go to the park, the squirrels will come up to the people and beg. The gray squirrel just doesn't do that. And just those few squirrels that came in Southern California and also in Northern California, the same thing happened. Some of the people brought squirrels to the Presidio and let some go in the park there because they thought they were cute. Now they're all over the state, and they have kind of driven out some of the gray squirrels, but we do still see them in the area. But these are much less averse to human contact. California ground squirrel, you can see there, if you want to make the correction in your list, it is Odo spermophilus, and those are pretty common around here also. Those are another animal that you have to love them, but you can also kind of hate them sometimes because they can wreak havoc with your garden. But at Placerita, they belong here, and we're happy to see them marching around. Talking about identification, so these are some animals that you might see when you're taking a school group out because they are active during the day. Most mammals are active at night, and a lot of the mammals we have here that can live in this arid place like to be hidden and conserve their resources during the day, and they just come out at night. But since these are diurnal animals, they do come out, but we still are more likely to see signs of their existence than actually see them. So ground squirrels are really, really great diggers. If you see a ground squirrel hole, it's usually not plugged, and the dirt that has been excavated a lot of times is just kind of thrown around. Sometimes it'll be completely around the hole. A lot of times it is still just on one side, but it is randomly out there. But the big thing is that those ground squirrel holes, you can usually just look right down them. And as opposed to our next animal, who do we have here? You gotta know who this guy is. Yeah. So here is gopher. We have lots of gophers around here and lots of evidence of gophers. As much as you may have been looking at those Wikipedia or those pages on the internet, the first hits you get on gopher are all those exterminators. They still are a valuable animal to have in our environment, and really pretty. They have kind of an amazing setup. One tiny gopher in a year, it's been, I've read it sourced in more than one place, can move a literal ton of dirt in its excavations. It's just hard to believe that tiny animal, if the rock solid dirt around here, if you've ever been trying to dig it and then you see the gopher making holes there, how did you do that when I can't even get through with my shovel? But when they're down doing those major excavations, they have a pretty good setup, just like we were talking earlier about the moles can too. But you can see they will have an area where they store food, they have an area where they have their nest, which is above the place where if any drainage came through. So if you've ever tried to flood out a gopher, occasionally it can happen. I had a gopher that had killed some citrus trees in my yard long time ago, and I didn't know at that time that it's pretty hopeless to try to flood it out, and someone had said, oh, you should flood it. And so I had the hose just going down the hole for a long time, and I pulled out the hose, and this little bedraggled gopher just came back out, and I didn't even know what to do. It's like, I just wasted all that water, and I've been so angry at you for killing my citrus trees that were a wedding present, and now here you are, and I could step on you or bash you with the shovel, and I can't do it. One of the cool things about them is they're, if you've seen gophers, you've probably seen their mouth pouch out to the side. They can carry food in there, but they also carry dirt in there, and it seems like, ew, that's disgusting, carrying dirt around in your mouth. But their pouches on their cheeks are fur-lined, so it's separate from the actual part of their mouth that's going to go down through their digestive tract, and they can hold quite a lot in there. So you will definitely see evidence of gophers. So does this hole look different from that squirrel hole? What might you say, how could I differentiate the squirrel hole from the gopher hole?
The dirt around it and the
Let's just
shape.
mound it up a little bit more.
So it's mounded up more, it's gonna be in that cone shape on the side. Anything else you notice? It's hard to see, but you might have, unless this gopher is working on this excavation right at the moment, and I've seen them here before working on their excavations. It's not like super rare to see a gopher, but that hole will probably be plugged. You can't always see just right from looking at it casually, but if you look down at a lot of times, because the gophers do not leave their holes open unless they're in action. Gophers sometimes come out to forage, but they can get a lot of their eating done from underground. And on 2 occasions, once when we were with a group of docents on a hike, I've seen a plant walking by and it's like disappearing into the ground. It's like, what the heck? But so they can do that. They can go through a lot of vegetation, as the California ground squirrels can too. The reason I was at war with them is because they also were trying to. They were winning the fight in the garden produce and trees. And I had an apricot tree that had probably 200 pounds of fruit on it. And before it was ripe to my liking, I had a squirrel brigade come in, and I went out into the yard and I literally watched them. It was like a conveyor belt. There were squirrels running along, squirrels in the tree, squirrels running away, each with a little apricot in their mouth. And in a couple days' time, they took all that fruit. Every single piece of it. Once I saw 2 California ground squirrels. I had a little cantaloupe that was about that big. It wasn't ready for me yet. I came outside, there were 2 squirrels working together, pushing it down the sidewalk. So I gave up and I stopped trying to, and I took out the fruit trees because it just made me so sad to get ready for that fruit. And then, I mean, I know they have to eat,
They were ready.
but I didn't want to go to all that trouble just for their benefit.
Squirrels are very resourceful.
They are. They're smart little things. Okay, here's a big group. They look similar. You are not by any means expected to know the difference, but you're just expected to know that we do have quite a few species of these animals living in Costa Rica, and they are different from one another. In the corner, someone did mention vole. You can see the vole's face is much shorter than the mole's face. It looks quite a bit like a mouse, but it still is a completely different grouping. Actually, sometimes people call voles meadow mice, if you've heard that, or the, field mice also they're called sometimes, the old little bunny foo-foo hopping through the forest. That's what he's getting. Voles are another super high energy intensive organism. They can just die of starvation in a single day if they don't get enough to eat, and they can eat up to their body weight in a day. Luckily, they're small. Okay, another page. What are different between these guys and the last page? Are these big mice?
Rats.
They are a different group. These are rats. And 3 different kinds that live here. So there's some controversy about this, the dusky-footed wood rat. It has been proposed that the wood rats that live here, wood rats are sometimes also called pack rats, the whole group of them. It has been proposed that we actually have big-eared wood rats here, but which is Neotoma, I think it's macro something, I don't remember what. But the only way you can tell the difference between them is if you do a molecular analysis. You look at their genes. They act the same in a lot of ways, but they are different species, so they wouldn't be able to reproduce with each other. But since it isn't proven 100%, and most people here prefer the name dusky-footed to big-eared, it just sounds a little cuter, then we still go with that on our list. But if you want to be very correct, then you can just call them a wood rat or a pack rat. And they really do collect little shinies. Another animal that has an amazing organization, it's kind of hard to tell, but you will see on the trail these nests that are dug around. Some of those nests not in our area, partly because of the fires that go through and clean them out periodically. But some of those nests have been known to survive for hundreds of years, and we have learned some things about the nature of the area of the past by taking apart some of those really, really old wood rat nests and seeing what's in them. They're very well architectured inside, apparently. I have never been able to find a good picture of it, but they are another animal that has their living quarters and their kitchen area, and sometimes they'll have an internal latrine area, but sometimes they'll just come outside to do their business, and then after it gets to be a big pile, they'll either close off that entrance to the den, or they will come out and sweep it away because they are that clean. They have a nursery area. They don't like to live together, but what they will sometimes build multiples of those homes in the same area, so they are nearby. And if one moves out, then another will move in and take over the real estate. And after fires, when they've been destroyed, sometimes we around here do see some interesting articles that had been collected from the area. Less common, but still in our area, is the desert wood rat. And then we have this big guy, the Norway rat, who also lives here, who is just part of the regular biome now, but was an animal that came here with humans, but a long time ago. Okay, you know this guy? Coyote. Isn't he pretty? This is also an animal that if you're coming here in the evening at a quiet time, you might see it, but I've never seen one with a school group. They don't like to be near people. They don't like to be out at that time of day. A beautiful animal. You might see evidence of the coyote in droppings on the trail, which are interesting for the kids to know. So these mammals are here around us, even though we don't see them. Scientists a lot of times have to go by the evidence of something that happened and not by seeing the actual event. Coyote scat does look a bit like dog scat, but dog droppings are usually going to be just smooth and very similar because most dogs eat dog food, and when it comes out, it looks a little bit like it looked when it went in the first place. But coyotes, depending on what they've been eating, their scat's going to look very different. And usually there will be some hair in it, but they are feeders. They do eat berries and other things around here. So that's one of the interesting things about it. If you have a school group, you can look at it and see, oh wow, this coyote was feasting on the, I don't know, whatever holly leaf cherry fruit or whatever was in season at the time. But looking at those hairs too is kind of cool to see. We have gray foxes here. Anyone know that? I have not seen one in action here, but I have seen evidence. Gray fox scat, they're an animal that uses their scat pretty well to communicate with other foxes, and they like to put it in prominent places. So a lot of times you'll find the gray scat fox right in the middle of the trail. Yes?
One way to, if you see an animal running, that helps you identify a gray fox is they sort of streamline themselves and they look like a little arrow running.
Oh, cool.
Very interesting.
Instead of the more loping
They don't
of the
look, they
coyotes.
just
Yeah.
zip.
They also can climb trees, so you may see them in the bushes. And they do eat a lot of vegetative matter. You think of foxes as mostly eating the little critters, but when you see their scat, it's usually filled with seeds and nuts. The fox scat tends to be a little smaller than the coyote scat. Of course, the dog scat is dependent on the size of the dog, but it has more pointed ends. The coyote scat, a lot of times one end is a little more blunt, and you can see that this scat, both ends of it are a little more pointed. Sometimes it's hard to identify it for sure. You have license when you are taking a docent group out. If it is one thing or the other, it sounds more interesting to talk about fox scat, then you can identify it as fox scat. No one is going to be upset about that. The foxes do leave scent messages in their scat for other foxes, and so as they're leaving that out prominently, they are marking their territory, but they also are giving information to other foxes about their health and their current diet and their intention for mating in the next little while or not. We this is considered habitat for black bear. We used to have grizzly bears in the area a long time ago. They were extirpated, meaning they are extinct in our area, even though they're not overall extinct, although the exact kind of grizzly bear who lived here is gone. When grizzlies lived here, they outcompeted the black bears for the territory, so the black bears really weren't here. They couldn't live in the same area with the grizzlies, but now, not like they're a lot here, but they can come through here from time to time, so they are considered species of the area. This guy, you all know him? Someone else that you probably have experienced at your home. And here are a couple of surprising ones. Anyone know these guys live here in Placerita? Along with a weasel? We have weasels? We do have weasels. You can see one in the museum. And we have a badger in the freezer that may someday join our other collection. Badgers in Placerita. Skunks. You are unlikely to see them. You can see them here occasionally, especially they're crepuscular and nocturnal animals. So if you're here hiking on your own in the evening, skunks, they don't run really fast, and if you do come across one, it's not likely to run away from you. You can take a good look, just keep your distance. We have a couple kinds here, the western spotted, which is more rare. That's one that if you are moving along and making corrections, the actual species is gracilis. The more common one is the striped skunk, and everyone's afraid of getting skunk sprayed. Usually before a skunk would spray you, they would give you a warning. They don't want to use up their spray on you, but they will if they need to. It's amazingly potent, but if you're ever around a skunk and it starts tapping its feet at you or displaying its back, then you know it's time for you to get out of the picture. And they're really accurate with their spray. They can. It depends on who you are reading the information from, but with pretty good reliability. They can spray accurately to 10 feet.
Wow.
So, and they a lot of times will go for the eyes. So they are interesting creature, but to be treated with respect. Favorite food of owls that can't smell them. One great horned owl, they went to his nest and they found the remains of 57 skunks. One owl ate 57 skunks? That's amazing. Must have liked them. Okay, we're almost there, guys. You know these residents of Class Rita? Bobcat, feral house cat. They do live here. They do a lot of environmental damage. The low end estimate of the number of birds feral cats destroy per year is 1 billion. But there are other people say no, it's more like 6 billion.
Wow.
So we don't really know. And the people that say, oh, we have to help support those feral cats, they say that 6 billion is way too high of a number. It probably is, but 1 billion is still a way high number too. And the number of mammals that feral cats eat, which granted, a lot of them are mice and rats. The people are happy to be having the population boom, but they is way higher than that. The range, once again, is huge, but it's like 5 billion to 25 billion or something. No one really knows, but it is an issue that we need to be aware of, and we prefer not to have feral cats in high numbers in our park. And of course this guy, anyone even notice the little baby there? They're cute. So you probably know that cougars have a wide territory. They need a lot of area to be able to survive. So they are just passing through their area briefly, but this is cougar territory. They're scat, they aren't as blatant about putting it around, so it's harder to find those evidence of them, but they are here. One more. Mule deer are here in the park. We made it to the end of that. So you have a list of lifespan and reproductive habits. I do have an updated one if you're interested that I think more accurately reflects our current understanding of that. I know I talked a lot today, and I'm sorry, but there's so much cool stuff about mammals that I just want in your background, and now you go and do what you want with it. The only thing that you'll be tested on for mammals is the general principles that you probably already knew anyway. But good luck using this as a springboard for becoming an even more informed person. Did you have a question?
You were well worth coming out here.
Yes.
Thank you.